Yes, it is time for the Studio Live Today podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking about Mac versus iPad. Do you need both? Which one should you choose? Should you upgrade your gear? Oh, and I've got someone on the show here to help me today. I don't have to just tackle this topic all alone. Please welcome back to Studio Live Today for the umpteenth time, Mr. Patrick from GarageBand Guide. How are you going, mate?
I am great, Pete. How are you doing? You okay?
I'm okay. Why did I call you Mr. Patrick? That's very odd.
I don't know. It's very formal,
yeah.
Mr.
It
Jones.
is.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Well,
Mr.
I don't
Bad.
like that. I don't like that.
Oh,
I don't like that.
No,
just
no,
Pete.
it sounds just Pete, and Pat GPT or Patrick. Bad.
Yes.
Yes. We'll be talking. Well, you've got to talk a bit about AI as well. I'm sure it'll come up as we go through because that's what everyone's talking about. We were chatting in the pre-show here about the fact that all the cryptocurrency bros are now AI bros. So all the people that wanted to sell you NFTs, now they want to sell you AI stuff somehow. It's like, how do we make money out of this? Quick. For the, because again, people who are listening to this podcast, they may not have watched some of our live shows and the episodes of GarageBand Weekly and our other shows that you've been on. Who are you and what do you do around these parts, Patrick?
Oh, well, I run a YouTube and website, a YouTube channel, I should say, and a website called the GarageBand or the GarageBand Guide, depending on where you are in the world, but depends on how you pronounce that. So I kind of teach you how to use GarageBand on your Mac or on your iOS device, and plus do things like app reviews, gear reviews, all that kind of good stuff as well.
Very, very good indeed. And for those that are watching or listening in now-ish, we're recording in February 2023, you just dropped a great video about some budget gear, some budget audio interfaces. I know it's a question I get asked about a lot, and I'm sure you do too. What do you use? What do you plug in to get good quality stuff? Is the spoiler alert that they're all pretty good, or am I jumping the gun on that?
I mean, you can't really go wrong nowadays. Everything in that video or all the interfaces are kind of around between kind of $50 up to $150. So it's all kind of focused towards home recording beginners and people who are going to be making music in a little cupboard or in a bedroom or whatever. But yeah, I mean, the quality of these kind of things for around that price nowadays, the quality is incredible compared to like 10 years ago where, you wouldn't be able to get anywhere close to the kind of sound quality and all the bells and whistles that you get nowadays. So, but yeah, it is still far and away one of the questions I get the most. Which audio interface should I buy? So it was definitely about time I had a video. So instead of replying saying, well, it depends, I can say, hey, just go and watch this.
Exactly. It's a handy thing to have to be able to refer people to. So go and check that one out again. The GarageBandGuide.com is where you want to go, not GarageBandGuide.com. By the way, I checked. It's still $2,000 for GarageBandGuide.com. So, but luckily, no one's put a competitor site up there. If I was a different kind of person, Patrick, and I had $2,000, I would buy GarageBandGuide.com and put a redirect onto someone else's webpage. But I would not do that because.
Would put a redirect to that thumbnail, I think.
Oh, I would, yes.
Video. You would buy that website and then put the redirect to that.
Oh man, if I was a richer man,
thank you for it.
I would 100% do that. Yes. So for those that are probably watching the podcast, where you've probably got a nice cleaned up version of the thumbnail that actually has Patrick's face. For those that are watching the live YouTube recording, there was a slightly disturbing thumbnail. Now you have to go back and find it, don't you? Go over to Studio Live Today. But no, in all seriousness, go over to thegaragebandguide.com, exactly as it sounds. Check out all of Patrick's goodness over there. He's got a lot of goodness that you can check out, as well as his YouTube channel. And by the way, if you are watching this one on video and you want to subscribe to this podcast, studiolivetoday.com/podcast or search Studio Live Today in your podcatcher of choice. So we normally talk about what's been going on around here as well. We've had the usual stuff. We have GarageBand Weekly, a weekly show that you've been on many, many times, and we're creating a punk song at the moment. So that's been a lot of fun. We recorded some vocals this week, did some vocal comping and stacking and mixing and all that good stuff. We had a happy hour where I played my own stuff because I'm a big-headed person who likes the sound of my own voice. And we, of course, had Your Music Live where we play your best independent music. And you can check out all of that at studiolivetoday.com. Time to jump in because we've got a big topic today. Normally on this show we have a group of different topics, but this topic was so big, you just kept firing different ideas at me and different things we had to cover and talk about to do with this topic. So we're going with the overall topic, and then there's going to be subsections we're going to talk about as we go. And
Yeah.
the topic is going to be for your home recording and for your music creation, do you select a Mac computer or do you use an iPad? Now, both of us are in a fairly similar position in that we've been creating music for many years. We've both used both iPad and Mac to create music. You've used Mac a lot longer than I have. We are both self-employed, running our own businesses where we create content as well. So we're going to talk from our perspective in terms of not only a music creator, but all the other stuff you got to do as well. Because even if you're a musician, you're probably creating images, you're probably doing video even, and you're probably running your life and needing a computer or a mobile device to do all of that. So putting you on the spot, Patrick, if I walked up to you in the street, which would be hard because we live in different countries, but if I walked up to you and said, I would like to get into all the capering and all the stuff that you do, what do I buy? I'm walking into the Apple store and I see the big shiny Macs and I see the big display of iPads. What do I buy right now in 2023?
Say it with me, Pete. It
It
depends.
depends.
Firmly on that fence. We've discussed this many times, and you've asked this question many times, and the answer's been kind of different over the years because I think the situation has changed quite a lot over the years. A couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago, the answer would 100% have been depending on your budget. If you're just getting started, probably grab an iPad. That would be the easiest way to go. Dead easy to pick up, dead easy to use. You're set to go. Nowadays, things are a bit more complicated because Apple kind of pulled their act together when it came to the Mac lineup. You've got very capable machines at a kind of entry level price, so you're not kind of paying $2,000 for something that can record 10 tracks of audio. You can get an entry level Mac Mini, for example, nowadays for what, $500, $600 US, and that will absolutely smash anything that you can throw at it. So yeah, it really depends.
Yeah, it really does. And I know people really hate that answer. There's all sorts of questions. I know that we're both involved in a lot of forums and the GarageBand users Facebook group, and you get questions directly and on Reddit and all the places. And it's always that. And I know that that your favorite thing to ask when someone asks a big question, big long diatribe question about GarageBand is Mac or iOS, and folks don't tend to provide that level of detail. And then when people are saying, should I buy a Mac or an iPad? There's so many different things, and we'll talk about some of the factors that you need to consider. But for me, a lot of it is about your level of experience and also the type of music you're creating and what you want to get out of it, and how deep you want to go with things and how much you want to dive in. And you're right that the budget side of things now, I reckon about $1,000 for a good iPad and about $1,000 for a good Mac, and you're going to get about the same out of them. So I think you're right that the budget side of things used to be, oh wow, Macs are so much more expensive than iPads that you really need to commit to get a Mac. And now, as you say, I think it even came down, didn't it? The latest Mac Mini, the M2, they dropped the price, which is kind of unheard of. So you can now pick up the latest Mac Mini M2 for less than the M1, which is a bit ridiculous and very un-Apple-like in my experience.
Absolutely.
So
I think
interesting.
if you're going to look... hardware aside, you need to look at the kind of ecosystem you're going to be working in. So, for example, if you were going to pick up an iPad, what you're going to be working with in terms of like a free DAW, if you were going to pick GarageBand or GarageBand, for example, if you then want to get third-party apps and third-party effects, the cost of those is going to be a lot less than it is on the Mac side of things. So you can kind of get in and get into some pretty serious, deep music creation on an iPad, and it's going to cost you a fraction of what that might cost on Mac. Having said that, on the Mac side of things, you've got a whole lot more I don't want to say better quality, but deep and usable plugins, instruments, and effects that are free than what you get on the iPad side of things. So although you maybe have a little bit of a larger outlay initially for Mac hardware, you've got more options when it comes to kind of money-saving plugins and effects a bit later down the line. So there's not an easy answer to this, really, which is unfortunate because there used to be, and there's not anymore, I don't think.
It is strange, and again the different model. And we'll get into the weeds. We'll talk about some models and get a bit more deep on this stuff. But yeah, the
Are
fact
we
that
not
there
in
are
the
so
weeds
many
already?
different. Oh, we're
Oh
already well
no.
in the weeds. We're going to go in more weeds. We're going to go down into the roots of the weeds and try and dig them up from
Love it.
there. Yeah, right. But so cost is different, and that's a really good point about cost. A lot of people think about the immediate cost, but not the long term cost, and that's
Yeah.
another thing that you do really need to think about. That if you wanted to go out and buy all the fancy plugins in the world, as we know that the mobile versions of these plugins on iPad, well, maybe you didn't know, but if you didn't, mobile versions of plugins, at least now in 2023, and it's kind of
Yeah.
changing a bit. They're coming closer together, but they're
Yeah.
anywhere from 10% to 30% of the cost of the full desktop version. So a plugin that might cost you £50, $50 on desktop is probably only going to cost you $9.99 on the App Store, or even
Yeah.
$4.99 on the App Store. So you can pick up a lot of those extra plugins. But to your point, another great point is that the free plugins are pretty good on iOS, but there are a heap. I know you did a video a while ago about all the free Mac plugins, and there's a heap of
Mm.
really good ones on there as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you just got a bit more choice on desktop when it comes to the kind of free, especially when it comes to instruments. You've got a whole host of
Yes.
things like huge free orchestra plugins. You've got a huge free, incredibly deep synth plugins that you can grab that will cost you nothing at all, and they could completely replace a plugin that would cost hundreds of pounds slash dollars slash whatever.
Yes.
Whereas you don't really have
Slash.
that on iOS, really, certainly not to that extent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It,
interesting, isn't it?
It is. It's. I know. It's added complexity. When we get together again,
Yes.
if you listened to us 2 or 3 years ago, again, it would be very different answers, and we'd be saying similar things,
Yeah.
but slightly different. So we'll return to that as well. By the way, anyone that's here live, the benefit you get is that you can ask questions. I've already got a couple of questions here ready for question time from Desolate Morning and Princess LDG. But if anyone else has a question, please just throw it here in the chat. Put the word question in front of it, and it makes it easier for us to grab that one. And if you're listening on the replay, come and listen to the live recording. We do it every Thursday afternoon or evening if you're in the US or the UK, or Friday mornings here in Australia. So connectivity is a big thing and a big difference, I guess. So your average iPad previously had one Lightning port. Your average iPad now has one USB-C or Thunderbolt port. Your average
Yep.
Mac will have generally at least a couple, if not multiple, USB-C ports. If you're going a desktop route, you'll have USB-A ports. So connectivity wise, if someone wants to hook up a bunch of stuff, talking MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, all the gear, is a Mac easier and better, or is that sort of gap narrowing as well?
I mean, easier, yeah. You're going to have more ports from the outset, especially something. I've got a Mac Mini in front of me that's got USB-A ports, USB or Thunderbolt ports, HDMI ports. You can just kind of hook it straight up to anything you want, really within reason. Whereas, yeah, you're right. I think Lightning, touching on Lightning briefly, I think it's dead.
Yeah.
Quite
Yes.
rightly, not before time, needs to go away. Thank you, EU, for kind of forcing Apple's hand with that.
That's
Yeah.
yes. But please, all
mean,
our European friends, thank you for that, because yeah, it's long overdue.
Yeah, so the sooner that goes away, the better. Obviously, the iPhones are switching to USB-C. I think it's just USB-C. It's not Thunderbolt, is it? Next year. And then obviously the only iPad that still has a Lightning connection is the one that they've kept on from the previous year. So that will definitely go in the next year or so. So you're looking at a USB-C or Thunderbolt on your iPad. And yeah, I mean, you're not going to be free of Dongle City, unfortunately. If you want to hook up things like audio interfaces or SD cards to your iPad, you're going to need something like, I even prepared. Look, something
Here's one
like
you prepared earlier.
this.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
ta-da.
Ta-da.
Which will give you the kind of and even got a headphone port as well. Remember those on iPads? Wow.
Wow. I mean, my dongle doesn't even have a headphone port. Now I'm getting jealous.
really?
I've got like this. Well, I've got one with a headphone port, but yeah, this one has an SD card reader though. Ooh, and this one has a network connection.
Fun show. Oh, wow. Okay.
I know. Yeah, hardwire your network for your iPad. Yeah.
The good thing about your USB-C port on an iPad is you don't need any extra power. That was the big drawback with Lightning, was if you want to use an audio interface with a Lightning device, you had to use like a USB hub or plug it directly into the power with a camera adapter, and it was just kind of defeated the point of having something really portable, because you had to have a mile of cables attached to it to use anything of use. Whereas now you don't have that. You can plug an adapter in, plug your audio interface into the adapter, and then you're kind of off to the races. So it kind of takes a little bit of the headache out of it, really. As long as you're quite happy working with adapters, and there's not a huge amount of difference between the two. Certainly when it comes to like quality, sound quality, you're going to have parity between the two. It's not going to be any more or less on a Mac. I think it just comes down to how portable you want to be when you create. If you are one of these free spirits who wanders around coffee shops, like plugging in microphones and guitars and annoying everybody around you, then great, more power to you. You can do that. Whereas I find that when I want to do work properly, or if I want to record music or even write music, I kind of have to do it in a specific place, and it is this little kind of cave of a studio, but it just helps to get into that headspace. So having, been tied to this section, this area with the Mac, and it all kind of being wired in permanently isn't an issue for me. Whether or not it is for you will depend on how you prefer to create, really, I think. What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, I agree, and I guess that, there's other things that we'll get to, which is laptop versus desktop as well, because that's obviously part of that whole portability side of things. That having a laptop can obviously be more portable than a desktop, but I'm the same, and I think, I don't know, I don't know if it's an age thing, but I see, every time you see an ad for an audio interface or something that wants to push the portability, it's always a bloke with a guitar in a cafe sipping a latte and recording there, and I'm like, I love mobile for being able to take it, but I'll be sitting with my headphones on and a small screen just tapping away at it. I'm not bringing my gear and setting up for the day. The whole point of portable is to be portable, not to then rebase yourself somewhere else. So I'm the same as you, that I like to have my workstation, set up everything here, and then I guess the benefit of and look, Mac or iOS, the benefit of the whole setup is that you can take it on the go. You can send it over to your other devices and take it with you. So it is a better thing.
The beauty of the Apple ecosystem, isn't it? We'll talk about that a bit later on, but it's the big strength of all of these devices is that it's almost everything is kind of interchangeable, and you can move it about really easily.
It is great. You touched on it there briefly, but for those that may have sort of grabbed onto the point you made there around sound quality, you're saying that the sound quality is the same. I still get questions from folks saying, but I use a Mac because of the better quality sound. Can you debunk that for us? Tell us why that's not the case in 2023?
I mean, mostly your sound quality is going to come from the microphone and the interface that you're using. I mean, you're going to be plugging it into either a Mac or an iPad with the same plug, and you're going to be getting the same sound conversion from the interface regardless of where that plug plugs into. So it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. I don't think anyway.
No, and I think that's it came from a time where, because I know the very early iPads and iPhones only had 16-bit sound support, and GarageBand definitely was only 16-bit. We've now got 24-bit, 44.1 kilohertz, and then outside of GarageBand, you've even got 48 up to 96, 192 kilohertz audio in things like Cubasis and Auria. So yeah, it really has reached a point where, and I like to say that it's the analog to digital converters. So whatever you're using to convert to digitals, your iPad's storing the same ones and zeros representing that analog music as your Mac is, and transferring it between the two is going to make zero difference between the actual quality of the sound. So
the sad fact of the matter as well is that most of your music's going to be pumped out of an iPhone through Spotify, through iPhone speakers, or through iPhone headphones. Like, it doesn't matter that much.
I know. It's weird. I get people arguing because I always say, look, 24-bit, 44.1 kilohertz is all you need, and then you get the folks that come in and say, 96 kilohertz will make it even more pristine. And I'm like, for all those people that are listening on actual hi-fi gear, which is 1% of the people that might be listening to your music. So yeah, it's a slippery slope. But definitely the sound quality, I think, is similar to the cost. It's leveled out. The playing field is definitely leveled between cost. As the cost is leveled, the sound quality is also leveled as well.
Yes.
one thing you raised, which I think is really important to talk about, is how you actually work with the device. So the interface, the what I call HID, human interface devices. So obviously with your iPad or your iPhone, you've got a touch screen, which
Yep.
means that you can use your finger. If you've got big chunky fingers like me, you might want to get the Apple Pencil or an equivalent.
Yeah.
You've also got the ability to use a mouse or a trackpad on either, because a lot of people don't realize, but a mouse and a
Yeah. Yeah.
trackpad you can use on an iPad pretty much as easily as a Mac these days if you've got Bluetooth. But then keyboard as well is the other thing if you want that tactile kind of feel on your desktop. What's your take on that? What do you prefer to work? Is there a preference, or is it horses for courses as well with this one?
Um, I mean, it depends what you're used to and what you're kind of brought up being used to as well, I guess. I mean, I'm quite old enough that any kind of computing, I started out with a mouse and using my hand to move the mouse and move the little pointy thing on the screen. And that's just kind of how I learned computing. I think you find now when you speak to a lot of younger people who have kind of grown up with touch, that because that's what they know, they feel more comfortable with a touch interface. So I think a lot of it will depend on what you're used to and what you've been brought up using. Personally, see, I really like the Apple Pencil, and as much as I really like that Apple introduced kind of mouse support into the iPads, and then obviously found a great way to monetize that mouse support with the Magic Keyboard, etc., etc. I think the pencil is like the best way to interact. Or your finger at a push, but I've got big fat fingers, so the pencil for accuracy is like the best way to interact with an iPad. I find. It's almost like cheating when you use a mouse and a keyboard, because it's not really what the operating system is designed for. They've kind of had to shoehorn that in to satisfy all of us old people who need to have a bit of plastic moving a pointy thing on a screen instead of just kind of using the hardware as it's supposed to be used. But anyway, so certainly with the iPad, I prefer touch, finger, or pencil. Muscle memory and what I'm used to. So when it comes to creating and stuff, I would probably go to my Mac first of all, because it's just what I'm comfortable with. I can do either, but I'm probably, if I have the choice and it's not a case where I have to go somewhere and I have to be portable, I would probably sit here and work on a Mac if I was able to, by default, if that makes sense.
There you go. So and this is the thing, we're scratching the surface because we didn't even really know the answers to what we were going to think about as we go through. But yeah, I'm the same now. That it used to be a PC and now it's a Mac, and just again sitting here right where I am right now with a keyboard and a mouse in front of me, staring at a screen, knowing I've got another screen over here too, because when I do live streams, I have a screen I can show things on. That's my comfort zone, and then it's different for other sorts
comfort
of creating.
Zone. Nail on the head there, Pete. That's what all that waffle was trying to work towards. Comfort zone. Absolutely.
See, I did for you what you normally do for me. I normally say about 12 sentences, and then you just say one statement that sums it up perfectly. So there you go. We're helping each other out here as well. So the interfaces again, and I think we talked about this recently. So last time you were on, I think we were talking about Logic and Pro apps on iPad, because I guess that's one of the things that we can do a little bit of a sideways tangent here to talk about that there aren't the Logic Pros and the Cubases and these sort of like next level that you get on a Mac or a PC on iOS. You do have things like Cubases, and you have Audio Pro and other more pro level DAWs, but there are some things that you miss, I guess, when it comes to the iOS version versus a Mac version. It is slightly cut down, and I think that's by design. I think that coming back to the interfaces, I think that the reason is I can't see Logic Pro in its current form, and I think you made this point last time, being just shipped over onto an iPad, because it will need a mouse and a keyboard. You really can't create in Logic Pro with a touch interface because it wasn't designed for a touch interface. And as similar as GarageBand Mac and iOS are, the differences come within the interface, that one's got the touch screen. So if you want to be able to whack your screen and play your drums or your keyboards by tapping on a screen, you can use that. And sure, you can use your typing keyboard to play the same thing on a Mac, but you don't get that touch sensitivity. You
Yeah.
don't get that same tactile feel as a touch screen. And then for your controls, some people like the feeling of grabbing a slider with their finger and sliding it up and down or twiddling a knob, and other people don't mind the mouse or the keyboard and would rather have the workflow of being able to just press a button, knowing that that's going to do a thing rather than having to reach out and use the gorilla arms that people say, where you have your fingers up like this all the time. So yeah, I guess the benefit.
Do you ever tap your computer screen just randomly, just if you went from iPad to Mac or PC? Do you ever sit and tap at your screen like an idiot? Like I do that.
I'm getting better. My desktop screen I leave alone, so there's no fingerprints here. My MacBook has fingerprints because I have worked with touchscreen laptops for so long, and my wife absolutely hates my MacBook because whenever she's using it, because for her work she uses like a Lenovo tablet that has the touchscreen, Windows PC. She just goes there and she's like, "I'll just show you this," and she's like, "I hate your computer. Why will it not scroll?" which is another good point again, that you simply can't get a touchscreen on a Mac. So if touchscreen is where you came from, and look, for my kids don't want Macs, and this is a real problem. My kids, when I say, "What do you want a laptop, and what would you get?" They're like, "Oh well, no, I don't want a Mac because that doesn't have a touchscreen." Because they are so used to touchscreens that they will actively not buy a MacBook as opposed to a PC because it doesn't have a touchscreen. So, do you think? Look, all the Mac rumor people. Every year or so, someone comes out and says, "Oh, the touchscreen Mac is coming next year," and I've been hearing that for 5 years now, and it's not coming. And I honestly don't think. I think it's got about as much chance of coming as Logic Pro does to come to iOS, personally. But
wow, really?
Hot take, right? It's not coming, people. Just stop. Just leave it. It's not coming. There will be no Logic Pro on iOS, and there will be no touchscreen on a MacBook. All right, there you go. You can cut that bit. So in a year's time, when both of those things are available, you can come back and say Johns doesn't know what he's talking about. What say you? Do you think we're ever going to see a touch screen MacBook, Patrick?
I mean, I don't know. The rumor mill seems to think so, as you say. Oh yes, big knobs and cannot lie. Absolutely.
Sorry, we said knobs, and now the live chat are getting.
Maturity. I mean, it's a strange thing. I mean, you would think Apple would never do that. Why would they do that? It seems pointless. It would cannibalize iPad sales. But yet they brought mouse and keyboard support to the iPad, which is kind of the same thing, but the opposite, if that makes sense. I think if Apple can find a way to monetize that function with a MacBook Ultra, this is the only model that has touchscreen. Give me money, Apple. I mean, it's Apple, isn't it? If it makes the money, they'll do it. It's whether, but they would have to kind of redesign Mac OS around it. Yeah, because obviously Mac OS is really not optimized for any kind of touch beyond something like, as you say, scrolling up and down or something like that. And at that point, like, unless you're going to really integrate touch into the whole experience, then why bother, really? So yeah, I don't know. I think Logic Pro definitely not, or certainly not what people think of as Logic Pro on an iPad, as in a one-to-one, as powerful as Logic Pro on the Mac. Yeah, that's not going to happen. And I don't think you'd want it to happen. We've discussed this before. I think you want a powerful iOS-based DAW that was built around touch, as opposed to a port of a desktop DAW onto it that you have to try and to do automation with a tiny little point with your big fat finger. Yeah, that wouldn't be a good experience. So I don't think that'll happen.
No, I don't think so either. One of our folks watching live, one of our wonderful moderators, Thomas Christ, says I think they could make a GarageBand Pro upgrade that would have some but not all features of Logic. If they ever go that route is another matter. Yeah, and I think I said at the same time where I said. Yeah, sorry, you go.
No, I was going to say they've been quite hesitant to add even basic features to GarageBand that we've been asking, the community have been asking for years. So yeah, I don't know if they add anything.
Until we get a master fader in GarageBand iOS, I don't think we're getting any other pro features. So
give me panning automation or something. Jeez,
right. Just not.
Anyway,
give me the option to not auto normalize. Oh, that's right.
Exactly.
Next time.
Exactly.
Next time it'll be that. Oi, oi, oi. All right, we'll move on. We've got another couple of topics to talk about, but let's pause for
Hmm.
question time, shall we? Because we've got a few questions
Oh,
from
okay.
the folks who are here live, and I haven't even read these. I've just tagged them. So, folks watching live, if you've got any other questions, throw them in now, and we will throw them up here on the screen. From Desolate Morning: do you get better quality recording on a Mac? I mean, we touched on this a bit before around the audio quality. Is there any other advantages, I guess, is the question here, around the quality of what you can do on a Mac versus iOS that come to mind, Patrick?
Recordings, no. Post production, possibly. You might have more options on a Mac than you might have on an
Yeah,
iPad in terms of fancy plugins like Isotope do and things like that.
yeah.
So in terms of post production, you probably have more options on Mac and more things to spend a lot of money on. But in terms of recording quality, no, no.
No, no, agreed. And I guess the only other thing that I would say around that comes to mind is if you want a really fancy audio interface, like one with 8 or 12 or 16 inputs that uses Thunderbolt, that may not work with iOS because if it needs any drivers, it won't work in iOS. It can only work with a Mac or a PC if it has custom drivers. So, yeah, if you're using like the really expensive stuff that neither I nor Patrick probably even own, then you want to plug it in, you may need a Mac. But outside of that, for your average punter that's plugging in their Steinberg or their Focusrite Scarlett into their iPad or their Mac, you're getting the same stuff, same ones and zeros. Is
Yeah.
my view on that. What do you think of the Mac Mini M2? Says Princess LDG. I got that 2 days ago. Well, welcome, congratulations. I think it's a good unit. What say you, Patrick, of the Mac Mini M2?
Brilliant. M1 price to performance was incredible, and the M2 is cheaper. So yeah, no brainer. Amazing. Congratulations.
Yes. If you've got an M1 Mac Mini, though, you probably don't need the upgrade. Just quietly, we'll talk about that in a moment because we're both Mac Mini M1 owners. Yeah, I haven't upgraded, and I'm pretty sure, unless I'm mistaken, you haven't bothered upgrading at this point either, Patrick.
Nah, nah.
No. And we'll talk more in detail about that. Question from Smokey 1427, 137, sorry, 27. I downgraded you by 10. Question: can you use Native Instruments Guitar Rig on an iPad? Native Instruments Guitar Rig is something I'm not familiar with. Are you familiar with that? While I frantically Google.
It's a desktop plugin, so no, you wouldn't be able to use it. I'm
No.
not sure if there's a iOS version that you could download and use on iPad. So you'll find this a lot of desktop plugins. A lot of them will have an iOS version, but a developer has to specifically make that for iOS. And a lot of
Yep.
things like Native Instruments, I'm not sure if they have anything on iOS at the moment. Please don't prove me
Don't
wrong. No,
believe
I think
so.
that's desktop. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely
So you
desktop.
find a lot of desktop developers haven't made the leap to iOS and possibly won't. And we talked a little bit about the price differences on iOS. So something like this, which costs, how much does that cost?
I think it's starting at $99 US.
$99. So
I'm
yeah,
sure there's a
so
pro
if
version
they
that's
were going
even
to
more.
release that on the yeah, if they're going to release that on the iOS platform, they probably couldn't get away with charging more than maybe what $30-40. And for a lot of companies, it's just not worth going through the process of porting if they're not going to make a good return on that investment. So yeah, I wouldn't hold your breath. There's lots of other alternatives on iOS that you might want to look into. Really good ones like Tone Bridge. You've got other ones like Cleveland Stark. What other ones off the top of my head? What other ones have we got
I
here?
mean, the
We've
old
got
arcade multimedia. What was the one they
yeah,
had back in the day? Amplitude. That still rocks
it's
pretty hard.
Tone X
So
now, isn't it? Yeah, it's Tone
yeah,
X is the
yeah,
arcade
yeah,
one, isn't
yeah.
it? Um,
Yep. So yeah,
yeah,
there are a heap. So you don't need that. But yeah, you're right. Though I guess the point we're making is that if you really want the latest Waves or Isotope or Native Instrument stuff, yeah, you're going to be going for
yeah,
desktop because not all of that really high end stuff has been ported over to iOS. Some are starting to do it. So who the
yeah,
cool
yeah.
people that did the iHeart New York? They're a really good mob and
Baby
they've
Audio,
started
yeah,
putting
yeah. This is the
Baby
year.
has started really doing.
Loads of developers this year. It's like the floodgates have opened. There's lots and lots.
Yeah.
Unfiltered Audio released lots of stuff. Audio Thing are steadily releasing lots and lots of their desktop plugins on iOS. So yeah,
Yeah.
this year you're going to see a lot of desktop companies releasing stuff on iOS, which is good. It's good.
Yes, love it. Question from Dan Eckerberg, who says, what would you pick up, base model M2 Mac Mini or an M1 with 16 gig of RAM? Yeah, so if price is of the importance, would you go the base model and up the RAM to 16, or would you go the M2 with only the 8 gigabytes of RAM, Patrick?
I think probably M1 with 16, I would say. Even, I think, head to head, the M2, the base M2 chip and the M1 chip, you're getting about 20 to 30% more performance from the M2 over the M1. Maybe not even that much, but you'll feel more benefit from the extra RAM than you would from that extra processor performance, if that makes sense. Especially kind of years down the line, it'll last you a bit longer. It's a bit strange that they've kept just that base 8 GB of RAM this time round. I wonder if the next one they release, the base will be 16 instead of 8. But I would go for the M1 with 16.
I also would. As someone who has an M1 with 8 gigabytes of RAM, it works fine. And look, it does everything I need it to do right now. But yeah, you're right. I don't do anything. I do more things that are going to be memory intensive versus processor intensive. So that's the way you'll probably need to look at it. So, will you need the processing power? Are you running 3D rendering? Are you doing 4K video rendering and that sort of thing? Or if you're just doing music, you're more likely to be running 3 or 4 plugins in the background that are going to require your memory, as opposed to like an M1 will crush any live audio processing at 44 or even 96 or 192 kilohertz. So the throughput you need there for your processing is going to be fine, but the memory will start filling up if you start throwing a lot of plugins at your DAW. So I would definitely go. And if other people have other opinions, let us know. But yeah, and keep in mind the M2s. So if you've got the M1 Pro or Ultra, the difference is even less. Like it's not as simple as saying 2 is better than 1, because 2 is better than 1, but not better than 1 Pro, 1 Ultra, or 1 Max. And then there's going to be M2 Pro and Max and Ultra. So again, Apple make things more difficult than perhaps they need to. Joe and Barry Glenn, they say files or tracks constantly shift, disappear, etc. in GarageBand. Would this be less of a problem with Mac? Now, as someone who's used GarageBand Mac and iOS, do you find that problem with things shifting around, and B, is it easier on a Mac?
Can't say I have, really. It depends where you're getting the files from. Is this stuff that you've recorded into the app, or are these files that you're bringing in from somewhere else? I've had issues like that on Mac where I've brought in files from an external hard drive into GarageBand and then like detach the hard drive so that when I open the project again, GarageBand has nowhere to pull the file from, if that makes sense. That's the only time I've ever seen that before. So what more info needed?
And I think
Joe and Barry.
knowing questions I've had from Joe and Barry in the past, it might be to do with so there is that problem, and I guess that's just sometimes it's an iCloud problem as well, that sometimes things are offloaded and reloaded and all those sort of things, which can be a challenge. So I guess making sure you've got enough iCloud space and enough storage space, and I guess that's the thing. The iPad, we didn't really talk about it, but related to what we were talking before, the actual amount of storage. That used to be a differentiator when your iPads had a lot less. Now these days, I mean, my iPad has more storage than my Mac, which is weird. I've got a 512 gigabyte iPad and a 256 gigabyte Mac, so it's not really a problem with that anymore. I guess the other thing is around the touch screen. As we talked about before, if you've got the chunky fingers like we do, sometimes you can try to move a thing and it doesn't quite snap to the grid that you thought it was snapping to. So that potentially is a little easier with a mouse, with the precision, but maybe an Apple Pencil's in your future, Joe and Barry. So maybe, as Patrick said, if you want that precision but you enjoy the touchscreen, maybe instead of shelling out $1,000 for a new Mac, you should shell out the $100 for an Apple Pencil and play with that.
The important thing is you give Apple some money, is what we're saying.
That's
this video
true.
was sponsored by Tim Cook.
It is really funny. I don't know if you get this as well, but sometimes in my comments, people go off on tirades about how I'm in the pockets of Big Apple and how I've drunk the Kool-Aid and how Apple must be so happy. Or they'll say things like, oh man, that was really handy. Apple should totally be paying you for this. You should be sponsored by Apple. And I'm like, there's a couple of problems with both of those things. Apple don't sponsor creators like us
Yeah.
because they don't trust us to not ever say anything bad. And to, cause for instance, I don't
Yeah.
use the term buttery smooth enough, so I could not ever be an Apple employee. You have to be able to say buttery smooth without taking the piss, like actually seriously. Yeah, they do not. I do not agree with everything. As I ranted about auto normalization, a master fader, and a panning automation, three
Yeah.
simple things that I've been telling Apple to put into GarageBand for 5 years. They're not listening to me. So if you think I'm in the pocket of Big Apple, feel free to, because that's your right. But yeah, ain't the truth.
No. No. No.
All
No.
right, let's get a bit practical here, shall we? Because as well as music creation, look, we use these devices. Not, very few people buy a Mac or an iPad just to create music. They do other things. They're pretty cool. Now, one of the things that a couple of folks mentioned here, which I'll talk about, by the way, thank you to the crazy rabbit who said this live stream is buttery smooth. I love you. I'll love you. I'll love you forever. But Dan Ekberg says that need a Mac Mini for live streaming, and Thomas Christ says if you're doing any live streaming, you need a desktop as it stands currently. So that's another factor. Now we'll go live streaming, but also video creation. I use a combination, so I shoot some video on my iPhone, and I actually do my video editing on my iPhone and my iPad. I believe, at least in the past, Patrick, and correct me if I'm wrong, you do a lot of your actual editing and production work on your Mac. Is that still
Yeah.
currently the case?
All of it. Yeah. I've
All of it?
used LumaFusion, played with it. I have never edited something that I have released video wise in LumaFusion. It's always been on my Mac. Yeah, you famously. Do you still edit on your iPhone? You used to do it on the bus
do.
when you had a job, right? You'd sit and like edit like
Yes.
days worth of videos on the bus on the way to work. That's amazing.
I still,
I'm
even though I
that-
could
I'm
not
that
do that, I
prolific.
still do. It's very
Yeah,
difficult
no,
when it's. Yeah. Sorry, I was just saying when it's 40 degrees out and the sun's shining and my phone's shutting down, it makes it a little bit trickier. But usually I use
rub
my
it
phone.
in. You're talking about the weather before the show as well, Pete. 40 degrees. Jeez,
That's
I'm
actually-
Scottish. I would spontaneously combust in anything over 35.
I think so. You'll walk out and yes, yeah.
It's gone. What were we saying? Yeah, creation.
Yeah.
Again, it's comfort zone. I think for
Yeah.
me anyway. I've been using the same editing software. ScreenFlow is what I use because for recording your screen, surprisingly enough, but also has an inbuilt editing suite and stuff. So I've been using that
Yep.
for years, and it's just what I'm comfortable with. It works for me. I can bring any footage that I record on my iPad, if it's screen recording or audio, onto my Mac. It's really dead easy. You can just airdrop it right across. So we talked about that lovely Apple ecosystem before, and it's just dead easy, really. And I've got no reason to switch to iPad now. To editing on iPad, I should say, but I am very interested in the recent release of DaVinci Resolve on the iPad. Have you been thinking about this? Because obviously you predominantly edit on your iDevice. Have you thought about DaVinci and how it might be different to LumaFusion? Or
I have, and I've made the short-term decision again because of comfort zones and because being old and producing things that the learning curve right now would cost me too much time and the benefits would actually not outweigh the learning curve. So if you've watched any of my videos, you will realize that they are very simple. I don't put a lot of bells and whistles around them. There's a few little titles. There's a little bit of B-roll footage. Occasionally, I'll need to sync up some audio and video, and LumaFusion does all that and makes it buttery smooth. So I don't really have to think about it in terms of, well, what if I wanted to do this? So I understand if people are doing a heap of green screen work or if you're doing lots of multi-effects on your video and things like that, yeah, I think DaVinci Resolve could be great. The other problem is I'd need to upgrade my iPad because I'm still running the ancient, nearly 3-year-old 2020 iPad Pro. So I'm not in the M world. And from what I've heard, DaVinci Resolve, I think originally it was going to not run at all on anything, and now I think it does actually run. Someone can correct me on this on the iPad Pro 2020, but not as well because it's one of the few apps that actually utilizes a lot of that additional power that you get and the additional RAM in particular. So instead of the 3 or 4 gigs that you have, if you've got the 8 gigs or the 16 gigs on your iPad Pro M1 or M2, it will actually utilize a bit of that. So Yeah, I haven't done that. I have dabbled and I've tried sort of going back to the Mac way, and I downloaded what is it, Final Cut, and I got so scared and intimidated that I cried for a while and then closed it down and never opened it again. So I'm not going down the Final Cut route, and there's no point using iMovie on Mac because LumaFusion does everything. Plus, LumaFusion is actually cross-platform and one of the few iOS apps that will run on your Mac too. So I can occasionally open up a
Yeah,
project on
isn't it?
Mac if
Yeah.
I want to. If I do want the desktop, the big screen to be able to see things, I can just throw it over onto my desktop. So it's it's pretty good. But I must admit, for my day to day stuff, I weirdly, and we'll segment onto this because we do need to finish up in a few minutes, and I want to get your thoughts on the future because we're going to get our crystal balls out. But for your daily work and your daily tasks, what's your ratio, do you think? How much time do you spend on your Mac doing the work to run your business, to run the GarageBand guide versus iOS versus your iPad or your iPhone? What do you reckon that would be sitting at?
iPad and iPhone, I'd say probably maybe 70-30. So 70% on the Mac and
Hmm.
30% on iPhone and iPad. Probably more iPhone than iPad in terms
Yeah.
of actual admin stuff. So like
Yep.
emails, sending and answering emails, do it on the phone. Checking
Yep.
analytics, the performance of videos, do it on the iPhone. Scripting, I generally would script. I mean, when I do script, it would be in notes. It's not a particularly high tech way of doing things. The good thing
Yeah.
about it is that I can start a script in notes on my phone and then pick up
Mm.
my iPad and continue it, and then immediately turn my Mac on and continue it in the notes app there. So that's why I like that. But yeah, everything else in terms of kind of what else would I use my phone for? So if I'm going to be filming in my attic, if I'm doing top-down shots for like a product
Yes.
review or something like that, I'll just use my iPhone because it's. I mean, I've got an iPhone 10s Max, so it's not a new iPhone, but it still
Mm.
records in 4K and it still looks pretty good when you're getting
Yeah.
kind of a well-lit video from above. So I'll use my phone to video record some stuff. Apart from that, everything else, the editing, everything, creation, everything else, yeah,
Mm.
more admin stuff, again, because I've got a keyboard and I'm old and that's what I'm used to, I'll do on the Mac. So yeah, probably
Yeah.
70% Mac, 30% iOS. What about
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, well, it's
What do you
interesting
reckon?
that so I used to be, when I was a PC user, I was using my iPad a lot more, and now that I'm a Mac user, I'm using the
Right,
Mac a lot more. So I used to use maybe 30% PC, 30% iPad, and 40% iPhone, just because that's where I used to
right,
edit
yeah.
the end results on. And as soon as I switched over to a Mac, I do so much more on the Mac because of the crossover between the file systems. So it used to be that if I wanted to keep working on something from my iPhone, it was easier to pick up the iPad with the Magic Keyboard and do it there than it was on the Mac.
Mhm.
Now it's ubiquitous. It can be on either. So if I start something on my iPhone while I'm out and about, like you said, all of my notes and everything are synced across, and I can get home and sit down here in the studio, and in a couple of seconds, it'll sync all that stuff up, and I'll be ready to continue working in comfort with a couple of big screens and with my studio. And then I can just start shooting some footage or jump in and start a live stream. So I can,
Yeah.
for instance, this very show, I was on my iPhone yesterday while I was not in the house, and I was making notes about this show and putting them into, I use OneNote because I'm used to be a Microsoft guy, but I still use OneNote, but it just syncs up. And then I sit down here and I go, hey, Patrick, and then I open up OneNote and all my notes are sitting right there. So it does make it a lot easier being in that ecosystem. And like I say, it's designed that way. So yes, Apple have grabbed me by the, let's just say, bits, and that they've said, hey, we would like you to now buy all your things from us. So I have. And people will be critical of that, and that's fine, but it gets my work done in a much more timely manner, and it's a lot more efficient and convenient for me than what I used to do. So I guess I say all
Absolutely.
that to say Mac and iPhone, ironically, the iPad is the one that gets left out for me lately, which is weird. I hadn't really thought
But
about that till I just
then
said it right now.
would you create music more on the iPad than anything else?
Exactly, spot on. So I still use my iPad,
Right.
and GarageBand on my iPad is still my primary music creation device.
Right. Yeah.
Yet I don't do much else on there anymore. And at one point I tried to. And the problem is, as you said before, you alluded to it before, if you're trying to do the sort of stuff you want to do on a desktop on an iPad, it's kind of tacked on. So mouse and keyboard support is there, but all your apps are touch optimized. So you can use it, but it's not quite right for that purpose. Whereas everything you set up on your desktop is for a desktop, and then when you've got a mouse and keyboard, you can do it there. So I think that's the case. Whereas music, it's easy because I've always used the iPad. Before I had a Mac, I used the iPad. So it's like feeling like an intervention now, where I'm just like, I'm having a therapist session where I'm talking through my problems, and I'm like, so why are you an Apple addict, Johns? And I'm like, oh well, I've just discovered the reason, the secret. All right. We did want to finish up, so because we're at the end of the show here, we've talked a lot about, I was going to say the summer of the pros and cons. I think we've talked about so many different pros and cons, and the answer at the end of the day is going to be what you opened with it depends. Yeah. But I'd love to get your views on the future of, so 5 years time or even 10 years time, go out to wherever you want to be. What does your workflow look like? How much does it involve an iPad and an iPhone and a Mac? Is there another device you think? Are you going to be driving around in your Apple car using your Apple AR headset to do all your work? Or are you just going to be asking ChatGPT to run your channel and walking away? Where are we going to be? Where are we going, Patrick?
How do you know I'm not already?
Oh, your name here is Pat
really
GPT.
I've tried and it just doesn't like me. It doesn't want to do things for me. I have to keep doing it myself. God, the future's rubbish. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it would be lovely to see some kind of conjunction of Mac OS and iPad OS that everybody's looking for, and it'll be the same operating system on an iPad as will be in a Mac, because of course the Macs will all be touchscreen now, Pete. So it'll all work seamlessly together. I mean, it's a lovely thought, but I think you're forgetting the fact that Apple loves money. And Apple doesn't want you, I say this all the time, Apple doesn't want you to buy just a Mac or just an iPad. Yeah. There will never be one perfect solution to what we're talking about on one of these platforms, because Apple want you to buy a Mac and an iPad and an iPhone and a watch. I've got all of them. I'm an idiot. But that's what that's why Apple's the biggest company in the world. I mean, they make this ecosystem completely seamless and almost perfect. And yeah, you're never going to be able to get a perfect solution in one bit of hardware. It's just not going to happen, I don't think. So I think you'll probably see a continuation. I would hope that there's been a huge amount of backlash about the limitations of iPad OS, not just with music making, but just with limitations of it in general. So you would love to see them really work on that and make it something that is definitely a lot more useful for a lot more applications. You might see more integration between the two different platforms. My worry is that 2020, the Mac lineup was perfect. You had a Mac Mini with an M1 chip, you had a MacBook Air with an M1 chip, and you had a MacBook Pro with an M1 chip. And you bought the M1, and that was it. And then now you've got M2, M2 Pro, but the M2 Pro Mini is the same, or almost the same as the M1 Mac Studio. But then there's a Mac Ultra coming out, an M1 Ultra is not as good as, and it's just all confusing again. And the iPad lineup's gone all confusing again as well. So my worry is that it's just going to get more messy, and it's going to be harder to recommend things to people, because that is what we get asked all the time. So, I mean, I would love to think that the future is going to be a lovely utopia where we can all run the same operating system across all different platforms. My worry is that it's just going to be a bit messier, even more than it is now. But hopefully things will be slightly better on the software front, even if the hardware selection is a bit of a mess. Sorry, that was really quite depressing, wasn't it?
No, on that happy note, what a way to finish. But you know, you want to hear the good news is that Patrick and I are not going to be out of a job anytime soon, because simply the act of explaining to people what the heck all the different models are and what the difference is going to keep you and me in a job for many years to come. So hopefully,
what would you predict for the future, Pete? What do you think is coming?
See, Armageddon. I don't know. No, I honestly
That's the
think
spirit.
that, yeah, I don't see an end to the confusion in terms of all the different models, unfortunately, because we still haven't got the Mac Pro back yet. So there's still another piece of the puzzle to be put back in there, apparently. Look, I think it's, with all of that said, there's some positivity here in the fact that we do have really energy efficient, really powerful chips in all of
Yeah.
these devices. Apple, for all the buttery smooth stuff that I give to them, they are one company that do actually care about energy efficiency. They do care about the environmental impact and the recycling of their products. So I'm hoping that that continues, and I think they have a corporate responsibility to be that, because the biggest concern I have about all this stuff as an aging hippie is that our landfill is going to be full of various bits of glass and screen and chip and metal if we don't actually take that seriously. And the good news is, I think out of all this stuff, and someone asked a question here, and I'll finish on this, is that it has flattened out. Someone said, has the performance curve flattened out? And it absolutely has. The reason I haven't updated my 2020 iPad is that it does everything I need to, and probably will do for another 5 years. I haven't updated my base level Mac Mini M1 from 2020 because it does everything that I need it to, and probably will for a decent time to come. So I think we're at the point now where the base level is where the top level used to be, and the gap between that and what is the premium level is so much smaller that only a very select group of people actually need that. And anyone, the fact that right now anyone can go out there with $600, £600, 600 whatevers, and buy an entry level iPad that's going to be amazing and work for them for the next 5 or 10 years, or an entry level Mac that's going to be amazing and work for them for the next 5 or 10 years, is a pretty good place to be. And we weren't there 5 years ago. So if you want to end on a positive, I think that's the positive out of all that, that the longevity of the stuff that we have right now is going to be a lot better than it once was.
God, that's amazing. You know, Apple should really sponsor you, Pete.
Auto normalization, a master fader, and the ability to do panning of your auto. No. There's some stuff that we need there. Thank you very much, Patrick. Where's the best place that folks can go to catch up on all the stuff and all the things that you're doing on this wonderful internet of ours?
Thank you for having me. TheGarageBandGuide.com, or if you just search The GarageBand Guide on YouTube, you'll find me there.
Wonderful. If you're on the audio version or the video version, there will be links in the show notes and the description, respectively. Thank you, everyone, for being here. If you've been here live, you've been an amazing audience. We love having the live folks here to tell us when we're getting off on weird tangents, and then ignore them, can go off on the tangents anyway. And if you're watching on the replay or listening to the audio version, thank you very much. Don't forget studiolivetoday.com/podcast. And if you are listening on the podcast and you want to leave a little cheeky review, I wouldn't say no to that as well. Thank you, Patrick, again, for being here with us today. And thank you, everyone. As we say every week, please be kind to yourself. Be kind to others. Keep creating, and we'll see you next time on the Studio Live Today podcast. Bye for now.